So I hear you're not very good at playing instruments. That's what I heard. That's what they've been saying that. But don't worry, don't sweat it, because me neither. I'm not very good either. If only there was some way, or ways, multiple ways, to make it sound like we're better musicians than we really are in our productions and beats and recordings and songs and whatever else we might be making. If only there was some way. Well, I have news for you. There just so happens to be a few different ways that I know to make yourself sound like a better musical instrument player than you really are. So I'm going to share those with you all here today. Tip number 1 here, people, is always record to a metronome, please. It's going to make your recordings so much better, so much more on time. It doesn't matter how good you think your timing is, it's probably not that good to where a metronome isn't going to help you out. A metronome is always going to help you. Tip number 2 here, this is something that I did for quite a while when I was first starting out on pretty much any instrument. If there's a section that's just too fast for you to play, you just can't get the chord changes right, or you can't play it fast enough on drums, whatever it may be, all you have to do is slow down the tempo that you're recording to a significant enough amount to where you can actually play it properly. And then once you get a good take that you're happy with, just speed it back up in your DAW in post-production. This method is really nice because you can focus more on playing exactly the right thing you need to play than like just playing it super fast so that it fits with the tempo. One of the only downsides though is that when you pitch up a sample, you're going to get like some artifacts in there and you're going to be able to tell that the sample was sped up or slowed down. It just doesn't sound exactly the same as if you were to record it normally. This isn't a huge deal and it's not a super noticeable thing, especially when you have other instruments in your song. But however, tip number 3 is a really good way to mask the problem that you run into when you speed up a sample like that, and that is layering your recordings with samples or plugins, depending on, what instrument we're talking about here. So this might seem kind of like a taboo for some people, the musical purists, but believe it or not, it's actually really common for audio engineers to layer drum tracks with just drum samples, and it also sounds really nice if you layer guitars with some pad sounds from maybe a VST, or you put some other samples underneath them. It's really important to not get caught up in all the what you can and can't do when you're making music, because it's just making music. You want it to sound good, you want to be happy with the music that you're making, and if using samples and other different layers helps you to achieve that, then go for it. Here's a drum recording of mine with no sample layers at all, just raw drum recording. And now here's the same sample, but I added some drum one-shots on top of it. As you can see, it just beefs it up quite a bit, and it just adds another dimension, another layer that you can't get just from a recording only. Alright, so this next tip is a pretty huge one. This is something that I do on pretty much every musical composition that I make, and that is double tracking your guitars. Basically, this is a technique where you record the same guitar pattern 2 times. You take one recording and you pan it to the left, and then you take the other recording and pan it to the right. First and foremost, this makes your guitar sound a lot bigger and wider because you're spreading it out in the stereo field. But this also just gives it a really cool effect because of the variations in the 2 recordings. Obviously, you're not going to play it exactly the same way every time, so just those tiny little human imperfections create a very nice, very human sound, but I think you should just hear it for yourself. So here's some guitar chords, but just one track, no double tracking done at all. And here's the same chords, but now double tracked. Night and day difference right there. The double tracking just sounds so much better. Obviously, this does depend on the specific track though, because sometimes you want a very intimate, right down the middle acoustic guitar recording or something like that, and in which case you would go with single tracking. But in a lot of cases, I like a nice wide guitar sound. Speaking of guitar sounds, another tip that I can give specifically pertaining to guitars is to mess around with effects. It is a little bit of a meme to be like, oh, you're not good at guitar? Just put some reverb on it. However, there is a little bit of something to that. I think a lot of times you can get around needing to be a really insane technical guitar player by just maybe slapping some chorus on your guitar, putting some flanger on it, maybe a little delay or something like that. If I have a delay and a reverb effect and maybe even a chorus too, all on my guitar, I don't really need to play a whole bunch of extra notes. And honestly, sometimes if you do play really complicated stuff with a lot of effects on your guitar, it might not sound good. It might sound kind of overcrowded and like you're doing a little too much. much. So experimenting with different effects and seeing what sounds good is a nice way for you to kind of dabble into the guitar world without having to be a crazy, insane Jimi Hendrix type guitar player. So this next tip here is actually a piano/keyboard tip. I don't usually do a lot of videos or segments in videos talking about playing piano because I am really bad at it. However, that means it's perfect for this video. And there is one thing I know how to do that will make you sound a lot better at playing piano, and that is using inversions. So if you don't know what an inversion is, this right here is a C chord. An inversion of a chord is when you take one of the notes and you move it up an octave, or down, I guess, too. So we're going to take this C in the C major and move it up an octave to here. So now, instead of playing this, we're going to play this. So it's the same chord, but it just has the C up higher instead of being played in the bass. But when exactly would you use this? You're probably wondering. And I'm going to show you. If I was playing something like this, you'll notice that I'm making a really big jump when I go from these chords. So when I go from this C to this F, I'm moving my entire hand up to here, which is not very ergonomic or economic or good. So what I would do is look at the C here and try to figure out how we can go to that F a little bit more smoothly. So both the F and the C share the note C in the chord. But when we play the F chord, we're playing the C up here. All we gotta do is move that down an octave. So we have this. And now we're just gonna be going like this, C, F. Easy money, and I barely moved my hand at all. And then we could just make the same inversion with the G chord. Take this G right here, move the D down an octave. Now we got this. And now we'll have a chord progression that sounds like this. And that just sounds and looks way better. Looks like you actually know what you're doing on the piano, even though we both know that we've got no idea what we're doing. Another piece of advice here that I can give to make yourself sound like a better musician is to get really good at mixing. Listen, we're already not very good at playing the instruments, but if you've got a bad mix too, it's just going to be all bad and it's not going to sound pleasing to the ear at all. There's some bands out there that are by no means the best musicians, but they make incredible, amazing music, and that's partially due to the fact that they're very creative, have really good songwriting and very good ideas for songs, but also a lot of times their engineering and mixing is really good, high quality, top tier stuff. When your music is mixed well, it just brings it to the next level, and it's kind of that thing that everybody unanimously agrees on, whether you're a musician or not. It's like, if your song has a good mix, okay, this sounds professional, this sounds good, this sounds pretty nice. Even if you're just strumming 4 chords or something throughout the whole thing, a nice professional mix can go a long way. Of course, I'm not saying totally neglect playing the instruments and just only learn about mixing. More of what I'm saying is that you should be learning mixing and recording techniques in tandem with your playing techniques. And if you do that, you're going to be on the right track to sounding like a very good musician. Another tip here to make yourself sound like a better musically instrument player is don't be afraid to fix things in post. There's going to be times when you're playing really good for a take and then you mess up the last note. Maybe you're playing drums and you hit the snare slightly late on one beat. Maybe you're playing bass and you get too much of that squeaky sound of your fingers moving across the strings. All that stuff can be fixed in post, whether it's timing issues or even pitch correction stuff. You can always fix that stuff in your DAW. If you're just sitting there recording the same guitar melody over and over and over, just trying to get it right, trying to get it perfect, you mess up one little note and you're like, oh, I gotta redo the whole thing. Honestly, my advice to you is just throw the idea of perfection out the window, grab the best take that you've got, and then just make a couple alterations to it in post, and you're gonna have something that sounds perfectly fine. Even though it is really good to get that practice in, some days you just might not be able to play the specific thing you're trying to play. I've been playing guitar for a few years now, and even I have those days where it's just like, okay, this guitar melody is not happening. I think just sitting there for hours on end trying to get the perfect take can really deter some beginners from wanting to practice and wanting to get better at their instrument, because in my opinion, I think it should be fun to practice your instrument. I think you should be excited to get behind those drums and start banging away. I think you should be excited to pick up your guitar and just start fiddling around on it, because if it's not fun, then practice is going to feel like a chore, and you don't want to be doing chores. Another tip that I can give here to help you get much better recordings is to overdub your instruments with minimal tracks playing. Sometimes what I'll do when I record drums is I'll make like a ton of guitar layers, I'll put bass in there, I'll put keys and strings and stuff in there, and then try to record drums on top of it, and all of those layers and all of those little melodies bouncing around in there just kind of really throws me off. I'm not able to play exactly what I want to play on the drums. So what I'd recommend for this is just soloing out the most important instruments in your track. If you're recording drums, you're definitely going to want to have the bass soloed out, or vice versa. You probably are also going to want to have your main guitar chords or piano chords or whatever your main sound is in there. Any other little guitar melodies or anything like that, you can just mute those because you really don't need them in order to record drums. However, obviously, if you're recording more guitar melodies, you're going to want to keep those other melodies in there so you can use them as a reference and decide where to put new melodies and all that kind of stuff. Just use your best judgment and be very selective with the tracks that you have playing when you're doing your overdubbing and recording. Probably one of my favorite tips here is very specific to drums or bass. Two instruments that I love very much, but I'm not very good at either of them. But never fear, because I do have a solution. This is the solution. Dampening. Sometimes also referred to as muting. As you can see, I have a lot of it on my drums. This sleeping bag in here provides a lot of dampening. I also have these little bandanas on both the toms, and I literally have an entire shirt that lays across the top of my snare drum. Other forms of dampening or muting include little spongy things, tape, those little moon gels sometimes people put on their drums, just pretty much anything you can use to dampen the sound of a particular instrument. Usually referring to drums and bass, but you can also do it with guitar as well. But why would this help you to sound like you're better at playing the instrument? After all, they're just little pieces of cloth or whatever. How is that going to make you sound better? Both drums and bass guitar do a lot of resonating. When you pluck that bass string with no muting on it, it's going to ring for a long time. When you hit that kick drum or snare or tom with no muting, they're going to be loud and they're going to resonate for a long time. This means that any little minor error or little touch that you make on the drums or on the bass is going to be picked up and it's going to be heard. On bass, for example, if you don't fully mute a string before you play another one, that other string is going to be playing over it and you're going to get kind of a weird muddy sound. But if you got some muting on there, it's just kind of like a little helping hand that helps you mute the strings and just helps you get a better, cleaner sound out of your bass. The thing with this tip is that it's going to change the style of what you're playing quite a lot. If you want a very open drum sound or a very ringy kind of bass sound, this is just not the method for you. You should just practice getting better then. But in general, I'm also a fan of more muted drum tones and bass sounds as well, so I have no problem with it. I think it sounds good, and it hides the fact that I'm not very good at either of those instruments. But in all honesty, I think the best tip that I can give here is to just get better, stop being so bad, actually practice for once, watch a couple Drumeo videos, a few Andrew Huang tutorials, some how to get better at guitar videos, and just stop being trash. Just kidding. The real best tip that I can give you guys is to just practice a bunch and make sure that you have fun when you're practicing. What I like to do when I practice drums is put on jam tracks and play along to those. I also like to just go on Spotify and play along to my favorite songs. And every once in a while, I'll do all the rudiments and the, left, right, paradiddles and stuff. To get better at guitar, I'd recommend just learning all the songs that you like. I don't practice piano as much as I should, but I would recommend the same thing for piano. Look up how to play specific songs that you like on piano. Honestly, I don't practice bass very much unless I'm recording or playing for a beat or a song or whatever, but you can probably also find jam tracks or whatever on YouTube to play along with. But those are just some of the ways that I practice my instruments. It might be totally different for you. Practicing pentatonic scales for hours on end might be super fun to you, and that's totally fine. Find what works for you, find what's fun, find what you can stay consistent with, and stick to that. So yeah, that is pretty much going to do it for me in this video here today. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Make sure if you'd like to do so, you check out all my social medias, my Instagrams and the TikToks and all that fancy mumbo jumbo down in the description below. And I will see you guys next time.